We had 2 school board members to attend the National School Boards Association Advocacy Conference, and they're going to give us a little update from that.
Okay, I'll start. And on the minutes, I mean, on the agenda, I apologize, I missed this. It's the Advocacy Conference. It's not the annual conference. And if you don't mind, we're going to start with a video that was produced by the National School Boards Association regarding the census. And Dr. Little, if you and the senior leadership team deem this is something we would like to suggest that this be shared with our parents, because it's really a good video. So, Mary Beth?
It's important the census counts everyone, because if they didn't get counted, they would feel...
I think they would feel left out.
It's important that the census counts everyone because
they wouldn't really much have money to like make schools.
We could end up being jammed in trailers like at some far other school.
It's important the census counts everyone because, well, why wouldn't they count everyone?
The Commerce Department announced the 2020 census will include a question of citizenship.
If a citizenship question were added to the census, up to 10% of the population would likely not respond.
People were really afraid, first of all, that if non-citizens put their information in the census, that would somehow ultimately be used against them individually.
A lot of people would not have filled out the form because they may be in a mixed status family.
But I always remind people that this is in their best interest, for their community, for their neighborhood, for their schools.
The U.S. Census isn't just a population count. It helps allocate federal, state, and local funds to your community for things like hospitals, schools, and daycare centers.
The resources that we get from the federal government, like Title I and funding for special education, school lunch programs, all of that is driven by the number of people in the community. So we immediately swung into action in terms of preparing an amicus brief, speaking on behalf of school boards, school districts around the country, emphasizing to the court the importance of an accurate count.
A huge and unexpected victory today.
The court temporarily blocked efforts to add a citizenship question to the 2020 census.
The Supreme Court here is saying that the government's explanation for why it put the question on the census form was invalid.
The NSBA got its voice in there on behalf of schools, and it turns out that was the important voice. I think it tells us that that brief spoke to the Chief Justice.
The National School Board Association, representing school boards in every community throughout the country, is an organization that has credibility on school funding issues, education generally, and so the court would certainly pay attention to that kind of brief.
The Supreme Court decision was a major victory for us. We were thrilled with it, but it, quite frankly, was just the beginning. We're working now with the Census Bureau. We're working with partner organizations, and interestingly, and I think hopefully, working with local school officials all around the country, and teachers and kids.
The involvement of schools and teachers and students is crucial for the communities where we live, the schools where our children go to. All of that is directly affected by having a census count that is real, that is thorough, that is accurate.
If I were in charge of the census, I would probably do something like we're doing, except make it more digital.
you could just like post one thing on like Twitter or Facebook, and I mean, it could just be all over the USA like that.
Now that all the cool kids are on there, I guess TikTok or whatever it is.
If I were in charge of the census, I think that I would maybe do something like a commercial kind of like this, so that everyone knows why it's important to be counted.
Thank you. So that was one of the big things, of course, this year was the census. And I'm just going to touch base on, we had a visit with Congressman Wilson, and we also had a visit with Senator Lindsey Graham, and I'm going to let Anne Marie, because I'm going to brag on her in just a minute. But on our side, one of the things that came across that was real interesting that I'm not sure we would ever really want to do, but there's a huge national movement to bring a class action lawsuit against these companies that promote vaping. They brought it to our attention that they've actually advertised on Cartoon Network. I mean, it was kind of scary, some of the things they've done to hook our kids. And it's just really scary because our kids are so addicted. And Dr. Guyton, in his practice, just sees it almost daily. These kids that started out thinking it was something cool and now they're addicted. So anyway, that's just something we're working on. One thing Congressman Wilson was super interested in was our Big French Award, because he is always trying to promote things globally. And he just thought that was so exciting that one of the schools in his district won that big award, and that we are doing so much with immersion and languages and promoting global citizens. The other thing we really worked with them on, of course, was anything they can do to help us with the infrastructure bills that are going forward. We say this every year. We would love more funding for infrastructure. I know Mr. Salters would, because the one thing we really hit home with them about was that's how we can improve our security measures, is getting more funding for infrastructure bills. And then, of course, always fully funding our schools. It's interesting that the teachers spoke about that tonight, because that's something we always hammer home. Now I'm going to turn it over to Anne Marie, but before I do that, I wanted to start because I really wanted to brag on her. You know, she is our advocacy representative on this for our team. And she had the most unique opportunity, and she really hit a home run. And I'm going to let her share, because it's so exciting that one of our board members basically triggered this. So I'm going to brag on Anne Marie and let her share what happened.
That's an introduction, isn't it? So we were meeting with Senator Graham, and there were about 8 or 10 board members from around the state. And one of the topics that, so this advocacy conference that we go to, it's 2 days of, like 7 a.m. to 5 o'clock p.m., drinking from a fire hose. I can share with you the legislative priorities for the National School Board Association, and it's helping us fill our heads with all of the details, the current situation on priorities for school boards across the country, so that when we go to Capitol Hill on this Tuesday, we have back-to-back meetings with our congressmen and our senators to share with them as quick as we can what our priorities are and what we want them to do, because there's so much of schools are really affected by the federal government and what Congress does. And one of the big conversations this year was about the digital divide. We had a really great presentation on Sunday afternoon from an FCC commissioner, and she was talking about all the efforts that the FCC is doing to bridge the homework gap. And she provided a lot of statistics and information, and talked about some of the things that they're trying to do at the FCC level to bridge the, because so much of our country, students still don't have internet at home. And so that was one of our talking points. And when we're in the meeting with Senator Graham, one of the school board members brought up the digital divide, and Senator Graham was a little bit scattershot. He was jumping around a little bit, and I mentioned that one of the things that has been discussed that we're actually already piloting in our district is Wi-Fi on school buses. Well, you'd have thought that we had just handed him, a gold medal. He was so excited, and he kept coming back to it and kept coming back to it, and he said, we can do that. I'm going to introduce a bill to bring Wi-Fi to all the school buses in the country, because that's something that we can do.
And he loved the term rolling study hall.
We told him that we call them rolling study halls, that Google started that in our district, that it's been really successful, that it's a good way. So many of our students spend so much time on school buses and then go home to homes that don't have internet. And he instructed his legislative director to go ahead and start working on it. And then in the meantime, he said, President Trump will love it. It would be a bipartisan effort, because this is not something that anybody could argue with. And then within a couple days, there was immediate traffic with his office via email. And Senator Udall from New Mexico already had proposed a similar bill. And so Senator Graham is signing on as a co-sponsor, which means it is bipartisan, because Senator Udall is a Democrat from New Mexico. And so it sounds like it's really got a lot of traction, and it's something that Senator Graham is very excited about.
Signed a number, and it's off and running.
So,
and I just want to give her credit, because He was very sick that day, Dr. Little.
Yeah.
He was very sick that day, and somehow Anne-Marie was seated right beside him, and I mean, he was hacking and coughing and sneezing.
A germ magnet.
Right on her. And when she just launched into this, and then also we found out that Greenville County has recently put Wi-Fi on 300 of their buses, and one of their board members was able to give him some dollar figures, and the dollars associated with the results are pretty minimal, actually. So, I mean, he just went crazy. In fact, they contacted us before I think we even got back to remind us to send the information to Senator Graham.
Well, and actually it was interesting because Senator Graham's office, before we had even left Capitol Hill, had tweeted about it, and the FCC commissioner, her office, saw the tweet and contacted the executive director of the National School Board Association and said, hey, let those South Carolina people know that they've got Senator Graham on something, and we really appreciate it. So it was really neat to be able to work with folks from all around the state to hopefully make a difference for students all around the country.
For students everywhere.
And I was gonna mention a couple other things, and I know he's counting minutes. But some of the other priorities are STEAM education, and one of the big things that we always talk about is IDEA and IDEA funding. And as y'all are all in the know on this, but IDEA was signed during the Nixon administration, and the commitment of the federal government to IDEA was that federal funds would cover 40% of the cost of the mandates in IDEA. Well, it's never been above 19% funding, and it's currently at about 14% of the requirement. We don't have to do 14% of the mandates. We do all the mandates, but only 14% of the funding. And so I had Mr. Salters send me some data, and I shared this with Congressman Timmons from Greenville and Congressman Wilson and somebody else. But the difference for just our district between the 40% that we should be funded and the 14% that we do receive is $27,550,437, and that's annually. And I just thought, well, how can I make that translate into something that, we're all familiar with? So I took the number of certified staff that we have in our district and divided it into that number. And this is just, speculation, but if we got that amount of funding from the federal government, it would permit us to give our teachers a $12,670 raise across the board, all of them, just that funding. And so that is just something that we need to continually talk to our congressmen about. Send them letters, call them, but IDEA funding is on the table every year, and they know that it's a priority, and they still don't meet that commitment. And they are hearing the conversations about teacher retention, teacher recruitment, valuing the teaching profession. And I think if we can equate that funding to the teachers in our classroom, I think that is a way to move the needle on that. So,
well, thank you. Let's thank Ms. Green, because that was exciting, y'all.